to the I Rehab Podcast, brought to you by the Sports MAP Network. My name's Nick Kane. I'm your host of the podcast. However, today we are doing something a little bit different. We are introducing a new co-host in Joss Whitford. G'day, Joss. How are you?
Good, mate. Well, thank you for having me.
Now, Joss, I'll get to sort of introduce himself a little bit more, but I guess the idea around this podcast today, it's not where we're off interviewing an expert in the space where we have before. It's probably, I guess, Joss and I, both physios, and Joss, as I said, Joss introduce his background and what he's doing. But it's an opportunity for us to, I guess, digress into a little bit of the content that we've had come before us, try to take away some of those clinical gems that we think were really valuable. And I guess this came from some good feedback recently from our Tim Sayers podcast that we did recently on the ACL, and it sort of really suited the clinician working in the clinic and trying to get good objective data and testing and how that then applies. So I think Joss has been really good. We're chatting around how he's used some of the information in the clinic, and we'll tease that out a bit further. But I guess also, moving forward, we'll discuss things. I think next sesh, we're going to chat through some hamstrings and some recent developments in that, things we're seeing in the clinical space and research and some of the experts and some good resources out there for everyone to navigate. So this will be more interactive on YouTube. You will see some clips of exercises. You will see some resources that we have there to utilize, and things pop up on the screen and things like that around papers that you can navigate. So that'll be more engaging on YouTube. But for those driving that can't do that, you can still listen to our voices and tune into our chat a little bit. So Joss, enough for me, mate. Tell us a little bit about you as a physio and what you're doing now, and I guess where you're living as well.
Thanks for that, Nick. Mate, yeah, long time listener, first time caller. It's always nice to be on the other end. But so I'm currently based in London. I've been here for the best part of this year. Currently working with the Royal Ballet as a primary, which has been unreal. Sort of warps what you think is normal. So it is dangerous if you spend a bit too long in it. But no, it's been a thoroughly enjoyable experience with the likes of Shane Kelly and Johnny Buck. Previous to that, I've sort of been fortunate to spend a bit of time working in AFL, AFLW, some A-League, and some international rugby. So sort of poked around a little bit for a little bit of time now, and I've been fortunate enough to work with Sports MAP for, the best part of sort of 6-7 years, I'd imagine. So yeah, it's sort of, as I said, it's exciting just sort of be able to have a chat about a few things and bring things to life a little bit more.
Nice, mate. A good intro. Yeah, as we said, Joss is, just full disclosure, Joss is a team member at Sports MAP, a sports physio by trade who's an excellent physio and done some brilliant work over the years. And Joss is now, I guess, heading up our UK arm. He's running the events over there, navigating some new masterclass content for everyone. So obviously, without going into detail, but we've got the foot and ankle event coming up in Manchester. That's almost sold out with Joss, and we're over there in a couple of weeks filming some really exciting masterclasses. So give us a quick rundown on who they will be with Joss, man.
Yeah, we've got a busy week after coming up. So we're going to have Liz Bailey doing some work around sort of sesamoid and big toe injuries. We're going to Ian Horsley doing some sternocostal, sternoclavicular sort of injuries, which will be an interesting unpack. Fergal Kieran can have a look at some T-junctions. Nick Court, objective testing for hamstring injuries, and how you would then program and plan off that. And to round it out, Rowena Johnson, who is going to do a full digest of basically diagnostic imaging for the hip and groin. So really exciting stuff.
That is cool. That's cool. So also have Rowena, who's a tremendous radiologist, talking at our soft tissue injury conference, and she did speak at our UK-based muscle injury course as well. So really some good names there, mate. That's exciting. Fergal and Nick Court on the hamstrings. Obviously, I'm navigating some hamstring stuff in my own space at the moment, so I'm pretty pumped for that. Both great clinicians. So, all right, I think hopefully people are feeling like they've got to know Joss a little bit more about his background and the like, so we can sort of punch on, and we expect Joss to host a couple of podcasts moving forward as well. So we do want to feel you get to know Joss and and then he can delve deep into some topics with some experts moving forward. But I guess I was talking around in our last podcast with Tim Sayers on the ACL and had some good chats, mate. What were a couple of things that stood out to you that you think were some really great takeaways?
Yeah, look, it was a brilliant podcast, to be fair. He's got an amazing clinic, Tim, and obviously some wonderful access to some amazing bit of kit. So I think for anyone that's interested in numbers, this is probably a good place to begin. That and Luke Heekspine is sort of combined together, gives you plenty of objective stuff to roll off. So I think that first and foremost just gives you some numbers to cling to. So we'll probably discuss those as we sort of work through this. That was probably a big part of it. His overarching theme of some of those kinematic stuff or kinematic deficiencies sometimes don't really tell you the why, and sort of being able to unpick it a little bit more with some of his objective data, I thought was really, really fascinating, and how he uses it clinically. So that was a big part of it. How'd you find that sort of aspect?
Yeah, no, I did. I think obviously people love to get some of the numbers and objective data we can utilise, and sometimes it is too difficult with having a bit more complex sort of testing and the biomech and that stuff, which we'd like to sort of touch on. But some of the data they pulled out was interesting. So can you give us a few of the snapshots of what that was?
Well, what did he have? He had sort of horizontal leg press. You like sort of 2 times on a single leg, 2 times body weight, and that's over sort of 4 to 6 reps. Smith machine calf was about 1.3 to 1.5 times body weight. Isometric quad on the leg extension, about 70% body weight. So look, he obviously tucked some numbers to things, and when I was sort of listening to that, I was trying to think about how we sort of bring that together with some of the other clinicians and other people that we've had on and in the past, and you link it together with say like a Matt Konopinski used some counter movement jump data to inform his sort of D-cell protocols and sort of exercise prescription, and he likes greater than 1.3, I believe it was, sort of newtons per body weight when he's looking at that eccentric peak force of counter movement jumps. So we've got some nice strength data, got some more explosive force and absorption data, which I thought was excellent. And in similar vein, in a practical sense, again, like building on that is something like an Enda King's, when he's looking at, say, like his trap bar, load absorptions, exercises like a 2-to-1 on a trap bar, and having a goal of a third of a body weight. I think clearly for these ACL athletes, strong calves and good absorption through capacity through their knee is super critical. And so they're sort of, there were some nice numbers that are sort of you can cling to and sort of cover a lot of your bases, I think.
Yeah, nice. I like, it's certainly probably Edna does it really well, and I guess touches it on a little bit around his masterclass on stiffness within ACL stream as well. But you talk to the deceleration component. One, being able to read the force trace on a counter movement jump and pick up those deficiencies, whether it's the absorption or the concentric action. And obviously Luke, he talks to this a lot in his podcast. And then the exercise selection from there is really paramount. And it's good to just see some different examples of those exercises. So you mentioned the trap bar throwdown or whatever you might call it versus, Konopinski's split squat variations. There's some nice examples within the spectrum that we can use. I'll go back to your 70%. I liked Tim's approach with a 70% of 1RM for an isometric component within his ACL rehab. And, I gathered he was using that relatively early, like, from 12 weeks and the like. But I think just having some numbers there to guide, because I've been guilty before you can just do a leg extension and something I've used before is sort of like 50% of body weight for 8 RM. So 8 reps, 50% of their body weight as a reasonable measure, and just wanting that to be really good. But I actually did a workshop with some staff or some of my colleagues where I work the other week, taking a little bit away from Tim's 70%. So we tried that on the leg extension, and that came off the back of a bit of a chat with Peter Malliaras around some patellar tendinopathy measures, and he had some really good ones. Like he was up to 130% body weight for 2 up, 1 down. So really overloading that eccentric. And if it's funny, we come back to me like we know eccentric needs to be super maximal and overload, but still we end up just sort of doing it probably sub max in reality. I'd probably guys doing it around 60, 65 kilos, but now we're expecting that, hey, this needs to be closer to 100 kilos, 110 kilos as a measure. So I sort of go from that isometric level, Tim's mentioned 70% of body weight, to an eccentric level of, above 100%. It starts to give some nice metrics and numbers around it. And furthermore, a nice sort of step up we pulled from this chat with Peter Malliaras around 30 centimetre box step up on a Smith machine. Obviously making sure control is really good, but getting that load to at least 1 times body weight. And if you get yourself under there, it's reasonably solid. I was in there with about 40 to 50% of mine and thinking that's pretty tough. So nice way to expose an athlete and find out sort of where that deficiency is a little bit. So just a couple more numbers there that sort of fit and in line with that pattern. That's what I also enjoyed.
Just unpack that step up again a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's just getting under a Smith machine. So I guess you are, for his philosophy, taking away the need for the stability aspect. And so we can just get some heavy load. And that is, it's a 30 centimetre box directly under the Smith machine. And obviously just a slow guided step up and then trying to control all the way down and not sort of pushing off the back leg too much. So you are going to overload and get that nice stimulus through the quad. We're talking patellar tendons here, and allowing that sort of number as a measure to get to. So I think it's a nice step from, if we are back on patellar tendinopathy, move from our isolated movements to a little bit more about functional, but still have a good target in mind where we need to be in that space.
No, that's nice. It sort of reminds me of sort of fortunate to do a masterclass that will be coming out with Lee Harrington on sort of ACL stuff. And he sort of, when he was talking about the Smith, he was one of the guys that published, the classic 1.5 times body weight for a single leg squat. And he sort of wanted to put on record that I think that it got misconstrued along the way, the Chinese whispers in a sense that, when he's doing that, it's really important. And again, this might be, a lot of clinicians probably recognise this. It's certainly, but maybe one's similar to me. It's always a good reminder. But if you've got an 80 kilo athlete doing a single leg squat, and the goal technically in the paper is 1.5 times body weight. So you got the 80 kilo athlete in the Smith machine. So your Smith machine weighs, let's say 15 kilos of the rack. You got the 80 kilo athlete doing that single leg squat. So suddenly we're already at 95 kilos, and your goal there is only 120 kilos. So really, you're only looking, 20, 25 kilos on sort of, 10 to 12 on each side. So it's not. I think a lot of people sort of look at that and go, "Geez, they need to be at 150, 160 sort of plus." They sort of lose. Right. They sort of forget about the body weight of the athlete. And so that was an important thing that he certainly wanted to make known.
Okay, it's a good point. I guess to clarify this step up, as far as I am aware, we're talking the body weight, and then you're getting that same body weight on top, which is a bit easier on a step up 30 centimetre box. So it's funny where you can just like take and pull different things you might hear and maybe misconstrue it a little bit. But
sure.
One other one, I guess, and we'll get back to Tim's podcast a little bit, but I guess while we're on objective stuff, numbers within the gym setting a little bit I like is and we talked around some of the functional progression stuff, is certainly one thing from Enda King that I've continued to use over the time is like his rear leg split squat, which is a simple split squat, but it's really trying to make sure we're getting the stimulus through the rear leg and by blocking, I guess, the front leg and making sure we're sort of not forward trunk lean and really getting that eccentric load through the posterior leg. And target he's sort of referenced that I sort of work off, and you'd have to ask him if you want the exact details, but around a third of body weight as well. For 6RM, and I think as a measure I've found that if you can do that really well, both in a knee setting, certainly an ACL setting, mid to later stage, and it's a perfect exercise for the quad strains and things like that. It's a nice measure, a really good test of capacity. If you really constrain the exercise and make sure they nail it completely well, you will expose them, and it's a really nice place to start and build out from there. So just throwing a couple of extra numbers that I've used clinically in the past.
And for those who aren't across that one, that's using a bench. Front leg basically goes underneath the bench, and you have that athlete who's basically starting in a lunge, and that front knee is pushed up against the bench, so their foot is sitting underneath it, and that's that constraint there that they won't be able to sort of work past. And clearly, playing around with. In addition, you see Tim McGrath plays around really nicely with pelvic position as well to get that really nice rec fem loading of that back leg, and it's a bloody hard exercise, and an excellent one as well if you constrained how much range they're going through for your PFJ sort of people, and you just slowly progressively extend out that range depending on their control, and as you said, have the strength goals in mind. I think it's a fantastic one.
Yeah, nice. So we've been able to sort of we've navigated a little bit away from, I guess, just talking around Tim's, but trying to bring, I guess, some other examples of some metrics and numbers within there. I guess putting your clinical hat on now, if you think around someone we might have seen recently with an ACL, and we might reference back to Tim's. Is there scenarios where where do you find we get stuck? Where's the hardest thing for us in just clinically, and where it starts to, what are the challenges that we're faced, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen ones that go well, they go well, and when ones that don't, they're a slog. It's a long time to be in the trenches with them. What I found, I think, was probably actually a really interesting point is clearly in that middle phase of the rehab, right, is always the murky area. I think people are normally pretty good at getting a knee fairly quiet and getting them moving, and maybe sort of when they're getting back into return to play sort of phases, they might be looking again really functional and really quite proficient. But clearly when they're building into that sort of a little bit more of the explosive phase, they've got some strength capacity measures that are coming along, it gets a bit murky. And I actually really loved his concept and his use of sort of that perturbation style of exercise outside of just the calf. It said, it's a great exercise for the calf, and so those pulses, those rhythmic pulses, is an excellent one to try and bridge that gap from a slow, steady strength exercise into a faster one. But using it on, say, like a leg press, using it on a leg extension, a hamstring curl, actually got me thinking. I'd sort of really never used it in that capacity, to be fair.
So was he? That was on a leg press, was it? So
he did it on.
When I do the podcast,
I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Remember the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. I think it was. Yeah.
He certainly did it on. He was talking to sort of leg press. He was talking to leg extension. He was talking to hammy curls, and just trying to build
different
again
ranges as well.
Yeah. Different ranges, different speeds. Building from, it was basically 80 beats per minute. He sort of started to, and he was saying that 130 plus beats. If you're getting your athlete to that 140, 150 beats in some of those movements, depending on the machine, and we appreciate sometimes the machines are a bit average. That's a really, really nice control that athlete can show, and particularly, as I said, through different ranges. So I just really like that concept to build that sort of proprioceptive aspect into more of a strength endurance style of exercise, and just got me thinking. Really, that's probably the key.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that was a really good point. As I was saying, I sometimes struggle to fully listen in the podcast because I'm sort of trying to navigate different things. So I almost need to listen back to them myself, which I sometimes do. If I could mute myself, I'd probably do it more often. One thing, obviously, let's just touch a little bit on the hamstring stuff within the rehab, because. And it's assuming we're using a hamstring tendon graft, those challenges with getting some of the hamstring strength and bulk. And I guess this might lead into our next little chat on YouTube and podcast later when we navigate some challenges around hamstrings and some of the great resources out there. But, I think more and more look at some of the exercises we've done in the past. And I think also that it just doesn't get the stimulus right within the hamstring throughout an ACL rehab, and we might rush our way from sort of doing some general loading to then eagerness to get to the Nordic, where I think we might be missing some really key beats along the way. What's your view with the hamstring loading and anything from the resources out there that we can tap into?
My two bits or things that I've probably stepped up in the past is probably not focusing as much on that real inner range hamstring strength. And clearly, with you see time and time again in those ACL athletes, they'll have those ongoing and persistent deficits. So, finding exercises that can really target that inner range hammy strength, because you sort of see some of when you do chuck athletes on sort of the RKDs and things, that seems to be a pretty common deficit. So, exercises such as, where they are sort of maybe even like lying up against something where they've got to start at sort of prone, 90-degree bend of the knee, plus or minus some bands around or resistance, and they are then from that position then pulling into maximal knee flexion. Like, I think that's a really nice way to sort of get some beautiful medial hammy activation. So, those sort of exercises are used, you can use those clearly once they've got range. You can use that super early on, and to really good effect, because then you just clearly keep loading it up, and then you're obviously expanding your repertoire accordingly. But I think stuff like that is just got me. It's always sort of something that I have front of mind.
Yeah. No, I like the exercise selection there. There's in the past, sometimes I'd utilize a slide as well, or the setup of like a typical hamstring slide, but actually looking at the concentric eccentric aspect. And if you sort of get them starting in a position where the heels are pretty close to their bum, and if you think about some traditional slides, there's like sometimes a wooden bolster, so at least you have like a reference point. So I'm probably talking something like that rather than typical just a little XR slide, something in that nature. But and being able to you can curl out with two and get it back to that same spot and hit that bolster, and you're getting equal. So if you're doing that bilaterally, you can do it. Then you throw them onto the right leg and they can do it. It's often a struggle. It's a pretty tough exercise, and you get them on the left and they're absolutely nowhere near it. So it's sometimes I use that as well as a reference point to maybe come back to make sure they, one, can do it, and then two, once they can sort of do it, then we're trying to train it. And I think it's a nice extension of some of that inner range work. Okay, that's good, mate. And I guess tap in if there's anything else, but I wanted to sort of reference a little bit around as we move through, I guess, the ACL spectrum, and we're going to wrap this chat up because we're keeping these pretty short and sharp. But the sort of later stage stuff, I touched on Enda King's like stiffness component, so that's a drop jump, really looking at that and how to train that. And I think really important when it comes to your ability to sort of execute through your jump cycles and change your direction and running gait. So all that stuff's like a really good reference point. Tim McGrath, some of his coaching strategies around the change of direction, so making sure they're not sort of breaking on that inside leg, I think are really pivotal. And looking back at some of his coaching cues and things like that within those later phase things, a couple that I recall, because I spent a day with him at Pitch Ready where we did a masterclass, but also had an athlete up there. Things like when we're doing a triple hop jump, which you'd still do and have that filmed and look at biomech, but making sure their eyes are up. That's one coaching cue. Never sort of watching where the feet are and doing that, because ultimately in a game you don't do that. So, two key things from him were, not decelerating the inside leg, so making sure we're really strong, can absorb on that last sort of step of our decel and punch through. And obviously we know all this stuff around the Enda King sort of work is a lot around sort of trunk shift within that and things we might look at. Then scaling back to guys who we don't have biomech, and the triple hop is just some coaching cues around that. And we know we can film and analyze things a bit more, but definitely eyes up. Was there any sort of later stage sort of tips that you've taken away from either Lee Harrington or a few of the other guys and girls that we sort of reference?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably back to that last point. Like, if you don't have access to some of this fancy kit, or sort of you are a little bit, you do get a bit confused. Say Tim's a great example of just say, like, if he only had one test, it's probably chuck them up on a box and watch them do a single leg squat for full depth and see what their control looks like left and right. And I think that's just such a nice nice exercise along the way, and you obviously can do that the whole the way along their rehab at every point in time, just to sort of keep them honest and keep them engaged. And yeah, he sort of threw to Lee, and it's not so much probably that like complete late stage, but it was more. It was a really great simplistic model that he uses for his exercises when it comes to these ACLs, and so he'll basically have his when he's thinking about what exercise he's chucking in the pot, and comes to that sort of murky mid-late stage where I sort of start pulling out whatever hair follicles I can find, is sort of what are my exercise pillars? Have I got something that's vertical? Have I got something that's horizontal? Have I got something that's force generating? So something that's a bit more explosive, and have I got something force absorbing? And so I think they're the really nice 4 pillars. So something horizontal, something vertical, something force generating, and something force absorbing. Now, obviously, depending on the athlete, depending on the testing you're doing or their deficiencies, you clearly might bias something maybe more force absorbing because they're struggling with that, and that might be the route that you're heading down a little bit harder. But I just think, if you get a bit stuck, and any clinician out there who sort of has battled a way through like me, they're nice pillars to come back to.
Like it, mate. Nice way to finish. Mate, well done on your first I Rehab podcast.
Thanks,
we'll
mate.
get through a couple of these sort of discussions over the time, and we endeavour to bring these a little bit more forward and just have some, try to just break it down and be a little bit more open with our chats, because we are clinicians ourselves, and we do struggle with a number of things that everyone else does out there, and ultimately, a lot of the resources that we talk to, they're there to try to help us navigate it, and we think that's going to extend on and help everyone else out there, which I know it does, because I've heard it does, but it's sometimes knowing where to find those resources. When you come a little bit, you reach a sticking point, and I get people reach out to me saying they're stuck with an ACL or this hamstring, and a lot of the time it's just about knowing where to start with, sort of developing, your next steps and who to reach out to or connect with or read or watch and all those things. So that's where this sort of stuff fits. Next week, we are going to go through some stuff around hamstrings. As I said, I think I've been chatting with Craig Purdom a lot, who's very open to always navigating and learning new things. And recently did a masterclass, Brian Heiderscheit. We've got Fergal coming up, and we're going to actually talk through around, I guess, navigating those annoying hammies. I know Martin McIntyre did our pod recently, but some metrics within that, T-junction work, I guess, even some experiences with Springbok recently and seeing some compensatory strategies around short head and medial muscles and maybe a bit deficient in the long head of biceps, and how do we get that through exercise selection? There's no exact answer here, but we're just going to maybe workshop and see where we come to, and go through some things like that within the hammy space. And then, as we say, we'll also get an expert on in the coming week or two, and we'll talk to that, which we do have some great podcast guests coming up. Joss, you've got 2 lined up. Just fill us in who they are before we finish.
Yeah, I've got a couple. We got Fraser McKinney, who's heads up Southampton in the EPL. He's going to be talking around calf rehab, and he's got some really interesting concepts there. That's how he biases things. And we're fortunate enough to be joined shortly by James Noak, who is a very prominent sports doc over here in the UK, and he's going to be unpicking some tricky and troubling sort of groin injuries in particular, and sort of what to do with them. So yeah, should be fantastic.
Awesome. All right, and for those on YouTube, we'll continue to bring obviously all this stuff to YouTube as well as some extra clips and things. So subscribe over there and track along. All right, Joss, we better let you go, mate. You are off to work at the ballet over there in the UK, and I am on holidays, so take it easy.
Thank you very much, mate. You take care, all right? Thanks, guys.